morning, everybody. Today is October 15th, 2020, and this is Mediation, the New Possibilities Hour. Our special guest today is Diana Jones, the senior cannabis reporter for Law 360. This is part of the Will Work for Food project organized by Natalie Armstrong-Motan. It's a fundraiser for food banks. We don't charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to food banks if they like what they see. Natalie, we've been doing this for about 6 months now, and every week I ask you to report on how we're doing, our running total in terms of funds raised for food banks. Would you please share how we're doing so far?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks very much for asking. I love when you ask me this question every week. I am once again so proud of our industry. We are at $56,600 for our grand total to food banks worldwide.
Wow, fantastic. And I'm sure we'll add to it based on Diana's great presentation. It's a topic of budding interest all around the country, if not around the world. It's a topic in which I've had an interest, a burning interest, since I was a college student at Berkeley in the 1970s. So Diana, we are all just ready to inhale a great presentation from you. Please tell us which food bank you would like us to support in your honor, and then we'd love to hear your presentation. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Novak-Jones. I'm the senior reporter covering cannabis for Law 360. And I am in Denver, so my food bank is Food Bank of the Rockies, which serves the whole Rockies region here. And I've got a little slideshow to walk you guys through. One thing that I'll say about my job is that it involves just a lot of combing through court filings, litigation, new complaints, filings every day. I mean, it's like it takes up hours of my life, of my day. And I think it puts me in a really unique situation to kind of see the state of litigation involving this particular industry. And so I've noticed a lot of trends in this space that I'm going to highlight for you guys today. But one thing I'd like to get started with is just what is cannabis? And what are we talking about when we're saying the word cannabis? So cannabis is the plant. It's the leaf that was on my page. It's the leaf that you see associated with tie-dye and, hippie lifestyles. It is the only plant that I'm talking about, but there is hemp and there is marijuana. And hemp is the only legal form of cannabis. Hemp has very low THC levels. That's the psychoactive chemical that's in the plant. And marijuana has very high THC levels. Hemp is federally legal. Marijuana is not. And in fact, marijuana is against the law under the Controlled Substances Act. If you wouldn't mind, next slide. So this is the current state of legal marijuana. Adult use marijuana is legal in 11 states. Medical marijuana is legal in 33. CBD products are sold all over the place. But in general, when we're talking about marijuana, we're talking about a Schedule I drug, which the federal government says has no currently accepted medical use in treatment in the US. I know that's kind of confusing because we do have medical marijuana, we have doctors prescribing it all over the place, but this is the limbo that the entire industry has to operate within. So I cover both hemp and marijuana, but what I'm going to be talking about today is predominantly marijuana because to me it's the most interesting thing. It's a illegal product that's sold across the whole country. And there are and it's a international industry. You know, we have Canada, which is fully legalized, you know, which has obviously shares a border with us. It's led to a really interesting sort of spectrum of litigation. So, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Slide. So, if you can imagine, businesses in this space have been traditionally very reluctant to go to the courts to hash out any industry. I mean, that would be akin to, you know, running up to a police station and saying, like, I sell drugs. You know, nobody was putting contracts into writing. No one lawyers, you know, and in fact, some of the earliest lawyers in this space were actually advising their clients not to put anything in writing. And so we weren't really seeing a lot of cannabis litigation until last year, to be honest. And that has, I mean, last year was sort of like a steady tick upward, and this year, despite the pandemic, that has continued to be true. We're seeing more and more and more and more suits filed all the time involving all kinds of cannabis disputes. So I've kind of noticed 4 different trends, and they're kind of chronological. The first trend that I'll talk about are CBD class actions. Next, I'm going to talk about low-hanging fruit class actions. That's my term, and I'll explain why. And then hemp partnership battles, so disputes between businesses that went into the hemp industry, and then licensing battles. So these are lawsuits against municipalities, states, about the way that they hand out licenses. So yeah, let's start with the CBD class actions, because those are kind of the first, that's really the first class action that the industry saw at all. So really late last year, I started noticing these class actions and they are involving CBD companies. So CBD is it's a single chemical in the cannabis plant that can be derived from hemp or marijuana plants. The amount of THC doesn't really bear on the presence of CBD. You can make CBD products basically from any type of plant. So CBD is it's so widely sold. I mean, I think Walgreens was carrying it for a while, Target was carrying it. And so it seemed like a kind of natural place for the class action industry, for plaintiffs' attorneys to start looking at litigation in this space. And those suits really allege one of 2 things: that the label said one thing, but the product actually contained another, or that the product itself is illegal. And the premise of the labeling suit is typically that you buy a package of gummies or whatever you're buying at Walgreens, and it says that each gummy contains 10 milligrams of CBD. If you submit that product to a testing lab, it doesn't actually contain that, or maybe the gummies contain a range, you know, some have 10, some have 4. So that's the premise of about half of the suits. And then the other one is that the product itself is illegal. And that is tricky. I think it really preys on the idea that the FDA has not said anything about CBD at this point. I mean, they have not regulated it. So these suits really take advantage of that and say that this product we're selling is a unapproved dietary supplement, or it's an unapproved food product with additives, that in general it's illegal. And a lot of these suits are still in court. We have not seen any kind of like major settlements come out of these cases, and I don't think we will for a while. actually many of them have been stayed by judges because the CBD companies have argued that the FDA is about to release regulations on edible CBD products. We don't actually know what the FDA is doing, so maybe that's true, but some of the judges have said that this is kind of too new and we need to wait for the FDA to weigh in before I make a ruling on whether or not this product itself is illegal. So that's kind of the current state of these class actions. I've named a couple. CV Sciences is a huge CBD company, so is Just Brands. They kind of are some of the best known. And so, yeah, we'll see how these suits play out, but many, as I said, are stayed right now. The next type of suit that I would talk about are these low-hanging fruit class actions. And I call them that because they have like very low barriers to entry. You don't even have to send the product away to be tested to file these types of claims. They are brought under the Telephone Consumer Protection Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'll talk about the ADA suits first because those were really the first ones that we saw. The premise of these suits is that a marijuana company, their website is not accessible to the visually impaired. And we saw dozens of those filed earlier this year. Now, those have kind of petered out and some of them have settled, but they've settled confidentially. So we don't really know what kind of liability that's posing for the industry. But the Telephone Consumer Protection Act suits have kind of blown the ADA suits out of the water. I see a TCPA suit filed against the cannabis industry at least once a day. It is nonstop and it's all about text marketing. So you visit a dispensary, you give them your cell phone number and then you receive text messages later, marketing whatever products they have. I cannot compare the volume of these suits to any other industry that I've ever covered. I mean, TCPA suits have grown in popularity over the last probably 5 years, but the cannabis industry in particular is being targeted in a way that I kind of think has no comparison. I mean, there's just no other industry that's dealt with this. And a lot of that has to do, both of these types of suits, the ADA suits and the TCPA suits, have to do with the industry's newness and also its lack of savvy that a lot of cannabis operators have so many things that they need to worry about, so many regulations, kind of operating on this line between legality and illegality, that they don't know about all of the liabilities that they face the way other industries do. So you see a lot of these cannabis companies turning to like text marketing in a way that other industries have already figured out this is not a good idea for me, because the TCPA comes with a statutory limit of $500 per unwanted text or call. So if you can imagine, if you text 1,000 people, your company, especially if it's a fledgling cannabis company, is looking at serious liability. And the one other thing that I'll say about the TCPA suits is that a lot of states have really strict regulations around marketing for cannabis companies. So they can't really put up billboards, or they can't put ads in local newspapers or things like that. So text marketing is actually one of the only routes that these businesses have. So it really puts them at risk for these suits. Again, we're not seeing settlements yet. I think it's too early to tell what kind of impact this could have, but it could be sort of like an extinction event for a lot of the smaller cannabis companies. If you get hit with one of these suits and you settle for enough, it could be really devastating. The next type of suit that I've seen happen a ton this year in particular are hemp partnership fights. So these are, I guess I should back up and say that hemp became federally legal as part of the 2018 Farm Bill. So December 2018. So it hasn't been that long that we've had a national hemp industry, but hemp was really pitched to farmers as this way for them to make money. You know, as the farming industry suffers for a variety of reasons, hemp was this new crop, and it was really pitched as like this huge moneymaker. So many people rushed into the industry, and unfortunately, not a lot of people knew much about hemp when they decided to get into it. So, so we have just a ton, not as many as the TCPA suits, but we see a ton of lawsuits between business partners in the hemp industry, and they have just a wide variety of claims. So some are, you know, I hired you as the growing expert and you've actually never grown hemp, so you, like, our crop was a waste. Or I sold you seeds with an expectation that I was going to get a cut of the crop, but you botched the farming so badly that there is no crop. I mean, there's lots of stuff like that. It's hard to kind of categorize them. But the other issue that the hemp industry has been dealing with is, again, sort of a lack of business savvy, not a lot of attorneys involved maybe in the partnership phase of this. You know, not a lot of these partnerships have really solid contracts. So that also contributes to the volume of these suits. And they're all over the country. They have not settled en masse or anything like that. That's very individual, but a lot of these suits are involving just many millions of dollars. Okay, and then the last section that I was going to talk about are licensing fights. And this is happening right now. These licenses are so lucrative, or at least perceived as being so lucrative, that the states that hand them out, I would say almost all have seen some kind, the regulators in that state have seen some kind of litigation about the way that the suits were, the way the licenses were awarded, maybe the way the applications were scored. The biggest, I guess, to date litigation was in Nevada. It's pretty much wrapped up at this point, but there were, I would say, dozens of cannabis companies that sued the state's Department of Taxation over a 2018 licensing round. There were allegations of favoritism, corruption. There appears to be a federal investigation ongoing involving one of the regulators that made the decisions about the licensing. I mean, the press in Nevada was calling this litigation World War Weed. It was so huge. There were so many consolidated suits under this umbrella that they held a trial in earlier this summer in the convention center in Nevada. It was so big.
Excuse me, Diana, could you explain what the state is licensing the marijuana companies to do?
Yeah, so these are licenses to do everything from grow to operate a dispensary to process marijuana into products or extracts to transporting marijuana. Most states require you to have those licenses to be involved in the industry at all. So in particular, the Nevada case that I'm talking about involved exclusively retail licenses. So these are all businesses that missed out on receiving a retail license in this 2018 round and, you know, had all kinds of claims about it. Ultimately, there was a bench trial, as I said, held in the convention center in Las Vegas, and the judge held that the licensing process was, quote unquote, contaminated, but they were not going to redo it. And actually, since all of this litigation, the state of Nevada has launched an entirely new cannabis regulatory agency. I think they realized from this whole situation that they needed a separate regulatory agency to handle cannabis. It was getting big enough. So, you know, there were like 100+ lawyers involved in that litigation. Now, what's happening right now is Illinois is beginning to see that level of litigation over its licensing process. And again, we're going to talk just about retail licenses in Illinois. Illinois, my home state, if you can tell by my Cubs banner, legalized marijuana for adult use at the beginning of this year, January 1st. And they gave the first retail licenses to businesses that had already been in the medical space, which I think Illinois had since 2015, don't quote me, but so it was later this year that newcomers to the industry were given the opportunity to submit applications for licenses, and retail licenses, craft grow licenses, infuser licenses, and transportation licenses were all up for grabs. But the pandemic led the state to push back the deadlines for when it had to award these licenses. And so it wasn't until like early September, that the state announced that there were 21 companies out of more than 900 that applied that were going to be able to participate in a lottery for 75 retail licenses. So if you can imagine, just me seeing those numbers, I knew that we were going to be looking at just a dump truck full of litigation. So that's exactly what's happening. And first, it started out in the first few days after the 21 number was announced. We started seeing lawsuits from companies that didn't get into the lottery, making all kinds of claims about the scoring being flawed or favoritism, I mean, all kinds of corruption, that type of thing. Those suits led the state to say, okay, we're gonna rescore all the applications. So we're gonna look at everyone again. We're gonna do this again. And after that announcement, more lawsuits were filed by people that said, well, what about me? Like, am I included in that rescoring? I don't know. You haven't been clear. And then also the original 21 winners sued and said, wait, like we're good with the process that you described. Let us just go along with what we were planning. We won. And we've seen literally lawsuits from every possible segment. You know, people that won, people that didn't win, people that said that veterans shouldn't have gotten extra points on their applications because that was a big part of the 21 groups that made it to the lottery. Anyways, it is going to be a disaster for the state. I don't know how this will turn out because all the different lawsuits want different things. So some of them want the lottery to go forward. Most of them don't. Most of them don't want the rescoring process to go forward. And in general, what this is going to do is just delay the cannabis industry's growth in the state. I mean, there's the point when these licenses are actually handed out is just getting pushed further and further and further into the future. So, you know, I think that this is a whole other segment of litigation that's going to grow as we see more states legalize. We're about to enter the election where several states are, you know, considering adult use legalization in ballot measures. Once those states start going and start awarding licenses, we're going to be seeing all this type of litigation forever. So yeah, that's pretty much it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions as best as I can. This quote I should highlight. This is I've been talking to a lot of lobbyists in the industry ahead of the election, just to talk about what different outcomes in the industry or in the election, you know, Senate control, who's in the White House, things like that, you know, what that's going to mean for the industry. And in general, they all say, but this is one particular lobbyist that said this to me this week, is that whoever is in control, we are headed to nationwide legalization, inevitably. Get to that point, everybody that's been on the sidelines, everybody that's been shy about this sort of gray area legality that cannabis operates within is going to drop that. And the amount of cannabis litigation that we're going to see at that point will like go so beyond what I'm seeing now that I have to think, you know, at least Law 360 is going to have to hire a few more reporters because I don't think I can handle all that myself. So yeah, thanks again. As I said, I'm raising money for Food Bank of the Rockies. The lawsuit is right there. Send me an email anytime. My Twitter is DHNovak. And one last plug, I hosted a podcast last year that was really meant when we launched our cannabis section. We talked about sort of 5 issues that are sort of threshold issues for the industry. They all stem from the idea that the industry is state legal but not federally. And if you have an interest in the industry but you want to understand kind of the background that it's operating within, I highly recommend my podcast. It's got a very long name. It is called Law 360 Explores: Legalization. It's on all podcast platforms. So, and I tried to make it interesting. We talk about taxes, but I think I did it in a way that will be appealing to anyone. So love to have some more listens.
That's great, Diana. Very, very fascinating stuff, food for thought. Let me ask you, what kinds of people do you see involved in this industry? Is this, you know, we may have this tie-dye image in our mind. It's, you know, Wayne and Garth in the basement growing some pot plants. Mm-hmm. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's an image that, well, if there's money to be made, then big multinational corporations are going to be, agribusiness companies are going to be doing this by the thousands of acres. Tell us about the people who you've met who are involved in this industry, please.
Well, it's definitely, I mean, the old timers, the OGs, as the industry would refer to them, are definitely few and far between now. I mean, especially the level of industry that I'm looking at on a daily basis. You know, that the Emerald Triangle in Northern California is home to a lot of illegal formerly illegal growers that have tried to legalize, that have tried to legitimize their businesses. But unfortunately, the way that we have done marijuana in this country has involved so much regulation that it's not open to everyone. You have to have such incredible access to capital to deal with those regulations that, you know, Joe pot smoker who used to follow the Grateful Dead around has really been shut out of the industry. The same is true for you know, people that have been incarcerated for this industry. I mean, it is so Suits and Wall Street now that there, you know, you see more and more states like Illinois trying to counter that with robust social equity programs. It is very much Wall Street. It's very much CEOs. It's very much, you know, big law firms, which is why I am covering this. It's all big money now.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I have a question. Can I ask a question, Jeff? Sorry.
Yes, Anthony. I'm going to open it up to you and anybody else who'd like to ask a question.
Yeah,
please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go first.
Hi, Diana. Very fascinating. I'm in Colorado, Denver. Of course, we were one of the early adopters. And, you know, what I do not see in the news is anything like, you know, heroin usage spikes after marijuana is legalized, or, you know, traffic deaths rise, or crime rate goes through the roof. Nothing like that. I'm just wondering, what's been the general impact of states as they adopt marijuana, you know, for legal use? Have there been any like other trends that you've noticed? You know, like anything changing because now marijuana is legal in a state?
I mean, it is. No, I don't think that we're seeing a lot of, you know, increased use of drugs. You know, the industry would tell you that cannabis is a great replacement for opioids. So amid the opioid crisis, more states should be legalizing so people have this access to marijuana. That's not generally been borne out by science. You know, it is the main thing that states are seeing, I think, is a new revenue stream. We don't have, I mean, I'm in Denver too. Colorado does not have, you know, a huge number of people driving under the influence, but we also don't have a great way of figuring out if that's happening, you know? So THC breathalyzers are not in wide use. So it's hard to say, you know, it's hard to say what kind of impact this is having. And I feel like a lot of the information that I have is coming through some kind of lens. So the industry is saying that, you know, actually teen use goes down, you know, in states where they legalize. I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of the cannabis industry news outlets really are more advocacy than just straight news. So, you know, I would say that we don't know yet, unfortunately. We don't know. We know that Colorado has made more than $1 billion in tax revenue from the industry, but that's taken, you know, many years. Illinois is raking in the cash. We don't know what the impact is on the residents quite yet.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question, Diana. What's the status of banking and the cannabis industry?
That's a great question. It's in my podcast, but I will. So basically, the feds have told banks that they have a lot of rules to follow if they want to accept cannabis money, marijuana money, I should say. Hemp money is a little different, as I said, because hemp is federally legal, but banks can handle the industry's money. They have to fill out a ton of paperwork to do it, because basically the federal government treats every dollar that comes from a marijuana business as money laundering or potential money laundering. So you need to just file these suspicious activity reports, SARS. You have to file them for like every transaction that your marijuana clients do. So it's a huge undertaking, and it's very high risk for these banks, or at least they're very risk averse in general as an industry. So it's not like if I had a dispensary, I could go to Chase and be like, hey, you know, I need an account for my dispensary. What really happens in the industry is that there are banks like Safe Harbor here in Colorado that pretty much, or it's actually a credit union, pretty much makes its money handling the cannabis industry. It's hugely risky. It's hugely expensive for them, but they've figured out how to do it, and they see this niche for themselves. But if you're in the industry and you're looking for a bank account, it's all very under the radar in terms of banks that will take you. You kind of have to know the right people. You have to hire the right lawyer, you know, who can tell you like, well, I have a relationship with this bank and I know that they work with the industry. But yeah, the big banks in general, Chase, you know, Bank of America, they don't care to take these risks because they control so much money as it is. They don't need weed money. So until there's the Safe Banking Act, which is passed by the House, but not by the Senate, until that becomes law, you're not going to see a lot of banks rushing to take this money, even though there's a lot of money in play.
Natalie, I believe you had a question.
I do. Thanks very much, Jeff. So Diana, I'm curious, what kinds of cases do we see go to mediation or arbitration, and how can the resolution industry best help in these lawsuits?
Yeah, so I did actually write a story about this last year because I was just interested to see if, you know, if the mediation industry was interested in handling these businesses. I mean, it does require some comfort with the idea that you might be, you know, handling a dispute that involves a contract that would require you to award an illegal business or illegal profits of a business. And I'll tell you that the industry as a whole has been very welcoming to cannabis, and the cannabis industry has been really interested in it because, and because of the privacy, because you don't have to run to the courts and say, I run a drugstore. You know, I mean, you can handle your disputes in private. And especially what I was talking about with the hemp partnerships dispute, there are a lot of partnership disputes in general in cannabis, in marijuana also. Again, because so many of the early agreements in this space were handshake agreements, you know, between me and my cousin, and like we used to grow in our basement, but now we're gonna go legal. So we didn't bring a lawyer in. And so there's a lot of really personal, really kind of bitter internal disputes that need resolution. And so that's a great space for arbitration, for mediation. And I know that the industry is turning to that. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of numbers on that because it's out of the public eye.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Other questions, please.
Hi, Diana. Hi, this is John. I do have a question. I have been listening to you use the word marijuana and cannabis interchangeably. Okay, now, yesterday morning I was reading something about it's like potential legalization of cannabis, but it's like what I read is something about like somatics, where marijuana is something like an illegal substance, but the transition to the word cannabis will be more accepted.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, so, you know, one thing, and unfortunately I do jump around between the terms. When I say cannabis, I'm talking about marijuana and hemp, the whole thing, everything that deals with that leaf, that plant. Marijuana is, unfortunately, it's the best term that we have to talk about the adult use or recreational drug form of cannabis. The word marijuana has some racist background, and for a long time I really tried not to use it. But the problem is we don't have a different word. You know, I say weed and pot as much as I can, but cannabis doesn't replace that word because cannabis is, you know, talks about hemp. And when we're talking about two things that are completely different legally, I don't really feel like I can say cannabis and talk about weed, you know? So unfortunately, we need a new word. You know, marijuana is not the best word. And the industry has tried to steer, maybe what you're talking about is that the industry has tried to steer everyone towards just saying cannabis because it's kind of like it gets away from that racist history of the word marijuana, but it's not 100% accurate, unfortunately. So yeah, that's why I end up saying it. So yeah, I'm open to new terms. If weed is comfortable with you guys, then I'll say weed more often. But yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions, other thoughts on this really fascinating topic? So
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Tony.
Sorry, you go ahead, Tony. Sorry.
Yeah, so my question is, when you were talking about mediation, you said that they're basically involving sort of like this illegal profits. Could you explain to me the risk to mediators of being the person who is trying to resolve those disputes? Like, is there a risk to mediators being involved in an industry that is, we'll go with gray?
Gray is right. You know, I am not a lawyer, so let me just put that out there. I'm not posing as a lawyer, but what I'll say is I've done a lot of writing about the risks posed to lawyers that handle this industry. And since many mediators are lawyers, you know, maybe there's some overlap there. The fact is many states, the bar associations have changed their rules to allow attorneys to work with this industry. Prior to maybe 3 years ago, none really had. And so you were taking, you know, you were risking your legal license by advising a business that's federally illegal. Most states that have broad legalization, places like California, Illinois, Colorado, they have changed their rules that say that as long as you make it clear to your client that this is a federally illegal business still, you can advise them. And I mean, that's really done because there's, you know, the horse is out of the barn. This industry is big enough that lawyers need to be there to help make sure that it's done legally. And so, you know, while yes, there are risks in certain states to, you know, to your license, I don't really get the feeling, and I've spoken to some attorney regulators in different states, they're not that interested in pursuing lawyers that are helping legal businesses. And I really, legal is the key there. If you are advising a, you know, an unlicensed marijuana business, it's a whole different ball game. You are still very much at risk, even if cannabis and marijuana are entirely legal in your state. You have to be working with a properly licensed business. So, you know, that would be like the absolute lowest bar, I would say, to getting into the industry as a lawyer, is make sure that these people have all the proper licensing and are operating above board 100%. Sure.
So Diana, are there trade associations in the marijuana industry or bar associations of the marijuana lawyers? Has it evolved to that point?
Oh yeah, so there's the International Cannabis Bar Association that is, I think, the only attorney, you know, national, it's actually international group for attorneys in this space. But then you see different states, I think specifically, I want to say like the LA County Bar Association has like a cannabis group within it.
I believe, yeah, cannabis section, I believe, yes.
The cannabis section, yeah. And then trade organizations in the space, there's so many. The one that's based here in Denver is NCIA, National Cannabis Industry Association. They're kind of the best known. They, you know, have their own in-house lobbying. The industry is still kind of playing catch up as compared to like the alcohol industry, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it is, there's also Attach, which is another big industry group. I cannot remember what the acronym stands for right now, but Attach is what you need to know. But yeah, there's tons of organization in this space.
What a fascinating world. Wow.
Yeah, there's always something, you know what, I talk to lawyers all day that work in this space, and many of them are kind of elder attorneys that were kind of on the downslope of their career. And then this industry came along, and it is so fascinating from their perspective. I mean, they have to be so creative in the arguments that they make, that it's kind of revitalized a lot of legal careers. And I say that because there are arguments that seem really easy to make. You know, you're in a contract dispute. You could just argue that the contract isn't valid because it's illegal. Or if you're in a wage and hour dispute, you could just argue that, like, well, I'm a marijuana business and I'm federally legal, so I don't need to comply with federal labor laws, you know, things like that. But a lot of these attorneys, if they're interested in working in the space, if their client is interested in existing in the space, they can't make those kinds of arguments. I mean, you're essentially arguing against the legitimacy of the industry, which is it is constantly what the industry is pushing, is legitimacy. We are real, you know, yes, we're federally illegal, but we're here and we're here to stay, and there's a lot of money involved, and so take us seriously. So you know, that kind of disconnect is what so many attorneys say is like the most fun thing about handling these cases.
I'll ask another question. So I'll ask the question about the elephant in the room then. And which way is the wind blowing as far as federal legalization of marijuana and federal acceptance?
Well, you know, I'll give you guys a little sneak peek into my pre-election stories. So obviously we don't know what's going to happen. If Trump, let's say, I'll give you the perspective of if Trump remains in office, if the Senate remains under Republican control, a lot of people don't really see the industry, they don't see legalization happening very soon under those circumstances. Obviously, we haven't seen any movement on that front in the last 4 years. So, you know, there's not a lot of motivation potentially on Republicans' control to make that happen. But what will be interesting to see is if, let's say that does come to pass, maybe some of the states that have ballot measures that are going to legalize adult use, like Arizona or like South Dakota, if those ballot measures pass, but Republican senators in those states continue to stay in control, you know, we're gonna see potentially more motivation on their part to legalize. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen next year if that comes to pass. Now, if Biden is president and if the Senate flips, I think we're also not going to see it happen next year. I mean, Biden is said that he is in favor of decriminalization, which is very different than legalization. And, you know, same with Kamala Harris. It is not, it is a priority of theirs more than it is for Trump. But I think it could happen in a Biden presidency, and it could potentially happen before the midterm elections, but it's not going to happen as soon as he takes office. So you're going to see a lot more movement in the industry as a whole next year if Biden becomes president. But it's going to be things like the Safe Banking Act, which I mentioned earlier, which kind of tells banks that they're safe to do this work. You're going to see things, you know, much more like opening up of research, things like that, before you're going to see legalization.
Okay.
And Diana, does the marijuana industry have easy access or challenging access to insurance?
Unfortunately, I'm not a super expert on that. I would say yes, that most cannabis businesses are underinsured in general, but the insurance industry, just like all kinds of vendors that serve the cannabis industry, is finding ways to serve this space. It's going to be more expensive for a cannabis business than a shoe store. You know, and that's even true of malpractice insurance for attorneys, by the way, that work in this space. They pay generally much higher rates because of just the volatility of the industry. But yeah, I mean, there is business insurance. It's a little trickier, for sure. I wish I had more info on that one, but.
Well, that's fine. Other questions from other folks? Okay, Diana, do you have any parting words? It's been a fascinating presentation with all kinds of new information and very thought-provoking stuff. We really want to thank you. Do you have any parting thoughts for us? Any questions we should have asked but didn't?
You know, I would say that the industry is only going to grow from here. So this year was supposed to be this real kind of shakeout year for the industry. I mean, obviously in January, we had no idea what 2020 was going to look like, but we expected to see a fair amount of companies fail this year because so many, it was like this gold rush, everyone rushed into it, people were not properly capitalized, people did not have good understanding of what it took to actually operate. And so we expected to see a lot of companies just shut down this year. We have seen some, but not as much. And actually the industry has taken the pandemic and thrived. The sales are at an all-time high for most states. I think Colorado just saw a dip in its sales this past month, but it had been like a steady, you know, steadily record-breaking months this whole year. And the other thing is that all states called the industry essential and said, this is essential. We need this business to stay open despite the pandemic. And so I think that actually, you know, all my predictions about this year were completely wrong. And so I think it's not really my fault, right? But I'm really fascinated to see how this year ends up. And, you know, maybe this could be one of the best years for the industry. We don't really know, but it hasn't been bad.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Tell us the Food Bank of the Rockies, is that the?
Food Bank of the Rockies, yeah. And again, you know, feel free to reach out if you have story ideas. I am always looking for them, or if you have heard of an interesting dispute that we're not covering already, you know, please let me know. I'm particularly interested in anything that kind of poses a new question for courts, you know, how to address this sort of gray area of an industry.
Okay, law360.com is a wonderful website full of great journalism, not only about the cannabis industry, but about all aspects of the legal industry. I recommend it highly to people, law360.com. Food Bank of the Rockies, please support it if you're able to, or another food bank of your choice. We really appreciate that. Diana Jones, you're very gracious to take time out of your busy schedule to share these thoughts and insights with us, all in the interest of educating the alternative dispute resolution industry and raising money for food banks as part of the Will Work for Food project. Natalie, do you have any, so Diana, thank you so much. Natalie, any final thoughts from you, please?
Diana, thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating, particularly for those of us who are always looking for, from an entrepreneurial perspective, what is coming down the line for mediators and arbitrators and how we can best respond to the needs of businesses, governments, and individuals as service providers. So I really, really appreciate you sort of pulling back that curtain and helping us, you know, maybe think about how we might be able to best serve our industry.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. Support the food banks, read law360.com. Natalie, thank you for organizing the Will Work for Food project. Diana, thank you once again for your very valuable time and your depth of your insights this morning. And with that,
thank you guys.
you're very welcome. With that, we are complete. Thank you.